The city slept, but the air outside the Pontifical Filipino College was already pulsing with the gravity of the day. In a few hours, 133 cardinals from 71 countries would walk into the Sistine Chapel, and behind locked doors, history would shift. But before that, long before the white smoke or the whispering ballots, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle walked alone. He wore no red, no rings, only black clerics and a long coat. The streets were quiet. His breath formed clouds in the cool morning air. In his hand he carried a rosary that had once belonged to Pope Francis, wooden beads, plain, blessed not by ornament, but by the hands that had held them through countless nights of prayer. He was not walking toward the Vatican. He was walking toward a grave. Inside Santa Maria Maggiore the lights were dimmed. A single priest, finishing lauds, nodded at Tagle with silent recognition and stepped aside. Tagle moved past him without a word, his steps slow, deliberate. Every footfall echoed between the chapels as if the basilica were holding its breath. The tomb lay ahead. Franciscus, no title. No dates. Just the name. Tagle stood before it and lowered himself to his knees. The silence around him deepened. He placed the rosary on the cold marble and closed his eyes. Francisco / he whispered in Tagalog, his voice raw. Fansiagang mahal kita. Nami miss kita, Fansiagang, I love you. I miss you. No one else was there to hear him. Only the statues, the saints in stone and perhaps, somehow, the man buried just beneath his fingers. Today the conclave would begin. But first he needed to speak to his friend. To his papa. To the shepherd who had taught him what it meant to be human before being holy. And in that silence something sacred began to stir. There was a moment, long and weightless, where nothing moved. Then Cardinal Tagle began to speak. Not loudly. Not even with full voice. He whispered. But the whisper carried because the basilica was still, and the heart of the man whispering had too much to contain. You once told me, he began, that the only power worth having is the power to heal. His fingers traced the edge of the rosary. But I don't know if I can heal anything. I don't even know if I understand the world anymore. He sat back on his heels, voice trembling. They talk about reform, Francis. They use your name like a banner, but they forget you were a man. A man who laughed, who cried, who was afraid. A tear fell, darkening the collar of his shirt. I remember that night in 2020, he whispered. When the square was empty. When you stood there, alone in the rain, blessing the world while it drowned in silence. He paused. I was afraid too. His hand clenched. But you weren't performing. You were standing there for all of us who didn't know what to pray anymore. You carried us that night. A breath. I still don't know how to carry anything. From behind the chapel columns, a sacristan quietly paused, watching. He saw Tagle kneeling before the tomb, whispering not as a cardinal, but as a child lost in grief. And something in that sight broke him too. But Tagle kept speaking. They say the one who leads must be unshaken, he said. But you shook, Francis. You let us see you shake. He wiped his face and looked up at the name carved in stone. Maybe that's why you led us so well. Then, in the silence that followed, Tagle whispered something softer than all the rest. Please help me. And somewhere, perhaps not far, something unseen leaned in to listen. The silence lingered like a veil. But in Tagle's heart something stirred, a voice not external, not imagined, but remembered. It was not thunder. Not divine. Just the soft, gravelly tone of Pope Francis, the way he spoke late at night, when cameras were gone and only honesty remained. Tagle didn't open his eyes. He didn't need to. You're not supposed to be ready, the voice said. It came from within, but also beyond. The church doesn't need heroes. It needs servants who know how to kneel. Tagle smiled through tears. I don't know how to carry you, he whispered. They want to build monuments with your name. They forget you lived with cracked shoes and trembling hands. He imagined Francis leaning closer, whispering back. I don't need to be carried. Just remember to carry others. I'm scared, Tagle admitted, of what this might make of me. I've seen good men lose their hearts behind closed doors. Then stay small. Stay close to the floor. That's where the forgotten are. And there it was, the breaking. Tagle wept. He wept not because of fear, but because of recognition. Because in that silence, in that grave, in that moment, he was no longer alone. He cried for the shepherd who taught him to love. He cried for the church that had forgotten how to feel. And through his tears he whispered, "I don't want to be a symbol." The voice returned one last time, soft as breath. "Then be a man. A man who loves. That's all I ever tried to be." They hadn't meant to listen. The sacristan was simply returning with the censer. The deacon had come early to prepare the altar. A nun had paused in the side chapel, rosary in hand. But one by one they had stopped, drawn not by sound but by stillness. In the dim light of Santa Maria Maggiore, a strange reverence had settled. Cardinal Tagle knelt before the tomb of Pope Francis, whispering words no one could hear, but all could feel. The air had shifted. Heavy. Sacred. From behind columns and curtains they watched. And none of them could move. The deacon, young and unsure, felt his chest tighten. He didn't know why he was crying. The nun dropped to her knees beside a pillar, eyes full of water, mouthing words of her own, "Gracias, Papa Francisco." The sacristan set down the censer and made the sign of the cross slowly, as if blessing a secret that had chosen to reveal itself only to those quiet enough to see. No one dared interrupt. Even the stone saints above them seemed to bow. Tagle remained unaware. He wasn't performing. He didn't know he was being seen. But in that moment, fragile and holy, those who watched understood something that couldn't be taught in seminaries or sermons. They were witnessing grief become prayer. Witnessing love outlive death. Witnessing a man speak to the past and be answered by something greater than memory. And in their silence, they too were transformed. The church was still hurting. But maybe in that kneeling figure it had started to remember how to heal. Tagle's breath slowed. He rested his hands on his knees, his body trembling, not from fatigue but from something deeper. Something ancient. Something holy. He looked at the marble. Franciscus. Just the name. And yet it carried the weight of 1,000 teachings. 1,000 wounds. 1,000 moments of mercy the world had already begun to forget. "I never wanted the ring," Tagle whispered. His voice echoed faintly in the basilica, reaching no one and perhaps everyone. "They talk about the chair of Peter as if it's a crown. But you never wore it that way." He swallowed hard. "I saw what it did to you, Francisco. The isolation. The pressure. The tears behind closed doors. You smiled for the crowds, but I remember your silence when the cameras left." He touched the rosary again. "It broke you." A long pause. "And somehow it made you holy." He exhaled. "I'm afraid it would only break me." The wind stirred faintly near the chapel, though no windows were open. Tagle looked up. "It's not the title that frightens me. It's what it might take from me. My joy. My tenderness. My soul." He clenched his fist quietly. "I want to keep crying when I hear stories of pain. I want to keep laughing like you did, like nothing in the world was too broken for joy." He bowed his head again. "If they ask me, how do I say no to the Spirit, if I don't even hear her clearly?" Another silence. Then, slowly, like a confession, "I don't want to lead the church." And yet even as he said it, something in his heart whispered back, "That is why you must." Tagle opened his eyes. The chapel remained still. But inside him visions stirred, fragments of Francis that no camera ever captured. He remembered him washing the feet of prisoners, crying with abused survivors in closed rooms, holding the face of a dying child and whispering, "You are more than loved." Not televised. Not written in official documents. But remembered in the trembling hearts of those who had seen him, not as pope but as shepherd. "You never chased thrones," Tagle whispered. "You knelt before lepers." His voice trembled. "You taught us that mercy wasn't a strategy, it was the very face of God." He leaned forward, his forehead almost touching the marble. "I'm afraid I'll forget that." Another breath. "That I'll be swallowed by the walls. That I'll begin to love comfort more than service. Applause more than truth." A flicker of candlelight danced nearby. "You told me once, Luis, the sheep don't need another bishop. They need someone who smells like them." He smiled through tears. "I didn't understand it then." He touched the tomb with trembling fingers. "But now I do." A long silence fell. Then, almost as if the stone answered him, "Then feed them." Tagle looked up slowly, eyes glistening. "Your staff is still warm," he whispered. "But your sandals are hard to fill." Another whisper from within, "Then walk barefoot." Tagle remained kneeling. The marble beneath him had lost its cold. Or perhaps he had surrendered to it. Either way, he no longer noticed the ache in his knees or the tightness in his chest. Only stillness. And something else. Something unseen. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't wind. It wasn't light. It was presence. Like someone had stepped into the room without making a sound. He didn't look up. He didn't dare. But every part of him knew he was not alone. He placed his palm flat against the tomb. And the silence pulsed. Not empty. Full. Charged with meaning. He closed his eyes again and let the tears fall, not in sobs now, but slowly, like rain on dry soil. A peace filled him. Not the kind that erases fear, but the kind that stands beside it and stays. "You're here," he whispered. "Somehow you're still here." He didn't expect an answer. But the blessing came anyway. In the form of breath deepening. Shoulders softening. A heart unknotted. And somewhere in the stillness, he felt the most human thing of all. He was forgiven. For doubting. For fearing. For wanting to run. And more than that, he was loved. Not because of what he might become. But because of what he already was. A man on his knees. That was enough. The sound was soft, but it broke everything. The bell of Santa Maria Maggiore began to toll, 6 long, measured tones. It was time. Time for the cardinal to rise. Time to walk toward destiny or denial or something in between. Tagle stood slowly. His legs shook. His chest ached. He looked one last time at the name carved into stone. Franciscus. No farewell felt worthy. So he didn't speak. Instead, he reached for the rosary, now warm from his hands and his tears, and kissed the crucifix gently before slipping it into his coat. As he turned to go, the candle beside the tomb flickered, not wildly, but as if in approval. And in the shadows of the basilica, those who had witnessed stayed where they were. Watching. Crying. Praying. Because they had seen something few ever do, a man blessed not by title but by surrender. Tagle walked into the light of the new day. And for the first time in many weeks, he did not fear it. Because in that moment, he understood something Francis had once said, now etched into his soul like the inscription on the tomb. The shepherd who kneels teaches the church how to rise. It was never about power. Never about papacy. It was about presence. It was about mercy whispered in the dark. About courage that trembles but keeps walking. About the love that lives beyond the grave. And about a church that, when it forgets how to cry, forgets how to lead. That day, Tagle did not walk alone. He carried a conversation in his chest, a silence in his steps, and a benediction that needed no words.